What role does community have in creating a future where women do not fear pregnancy? They say it takes a village to raise a child, and that is definitely true. Today on the Fearless Future podcast, we're going to be unpacking how do you create the modern village, so to speak, when the more traditional village no longer exists? Why are women so lonely today in motherhood? And the role of communities like Guiding Star Centers, the role that these physical outposts, so to speak, have to do with creating a future where women don't fear pregnancy. That's what's coming up today on the Fearless Future podcast.
Welcome to the Fearless Future podcast, where your hosts Lisa Canning and Leah Jacobson will explore what the world would look like if women didn't fear pregnancy. Through education, community, and healthcare solutions, Guiding Star Project strives to make this a reality at our physical centers across the United States. Join us.
Good morning to you, Leah Jacobson. How are you doing?
Good. Good morning, Lisa Canning. How was your weekend? Was it lovely?
It was lovely. The weather is finally, turning here, like just full on summer. And so I have been out with my kids. I love the sunshine so
Oh,
much.
I need the sunshine. It's so, for those of us that live in northern climates, like these 4 golden months of sunshine are like, oh, makes it worth it.
To practice the art of grounding. So, like, just being out in actual earth, like not just on my concrete, pad, like my feet in the dirt. We've been trying to spend as much time as possible. I have a lot of water around me where I live. And so, just like time splashing around with my children in the sand, getting dirty, getting like, swimming in the lake. It's been so, so nice. So, I've just been trying to be very, mindful, and you're not on your phone when you're in the water. Like that's my favorite thing about swimming is like usually you're not on your phone. You can't do anything. Like you're just like you're truly present. And so that's been so nice. How was your weekend? What'd you do?
Oh, my kids were in a triathlon yesterday. So we were out at the triathlon watching kids compete. It was a lot of grounding. A lot of grounding was happening.
Of course your children were in a triathlon. How many children were in a triathlon?
Quite a few actually. It was the PTO triathlon, but it's intense. It's not a regular triathlon. It's an off-road triathlon. So instead of what's a regular triathlon? Don't they swim, they bike, they run? This one's paddle. They paddle through like mine pits, and then they mountain bike through mountain bike trails, and then they off-road run through like mountain bike hills and trails. So it's not like a normal triathlon. And they did awesome. They did so great. It was so fun to watch.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And what's fun about these things, like my family is not that sporty. Like I did not grow up sporty, meaning my nuclear family. I did not grow up that sporty. Oh my gosh, I did like 16 years of ballet. So, you can ask me to turn a pirouette still and I can do it. But sports was not really a thing. Now with my children, we're in soccer, we were in karate for many years. Anyway, my point in bringing this all up is that things like the triathlons, I can imagine the community that gets created is just so fun. Like you're watching, it's my favorite thing about sports in the summer. You're watching the kids, you're like having a lovely time with the parents who are also watching. It's like an hour and a half of quote unquote forced conversation. I just love it. Okay, I have to ask you this question. Are you the mom who yells like either enthusiastically, like you're the loud mom who's like, "Oh my gosh, like go!" Like, or are you the mom who also is like, "What happened?" Like I can't picture. I'm not sure.
I have like multiple personalities. It's so weird. I don't want to be the mom that yells. I do not want to be her because I was an athlete all through high school. And I remember the moms that yelled. And I was always like, oh, that's so embarrassing because my mom was silent. My mom usually didn't know what was going on. She didn't really follow sports that closely. So I didn't have a lot of pressure as a kid competing, which was nice. I just kind of liked that my mom was there, but wasn't screaming at me. And so I've always been very intentional. I'm not going to be the screaming mom. mom. However, here's the problem. I'm also a coach. I have my minor in coaching. And so I've been coaching my kids' sports. And so as a coach, it's really hard to shut that off. It's really hard to shut that off. And so I've found myself very consciously trying not to be the mom that screams, but my kids are in really like competitive sports. I think wrestling has got to be the hardest sport for a mom to sit there and watch because your baby is like having their head pummeled into the mat by another child. And so that's the one sport that I found I I shocked myself this winter, and out of nowhere I was so calm, so collected. I thought I had it. And then all of a sudden I find myself on my feet screaming at a ref, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Sit down."
I wish I was there to witness you screaming because, like, I can picture it, but I also can't because you were just so like jovial and fun. But I can definitely picture you being like, "What was that?" All right, Leah. Today on the podcast, we are talking about community and the role of community in creating a future where women do not fear pregnancy. I have enjoyed this series so much because there can be lots of talk about what moms need. You know, the left can bring up all kinds of comments about why restrictions on like limiting a woman's ability to get pregnant, why that's the best thing for her. And they're often like, well, look, you know, you'd have to provide this, and this in order for women to succeed. And that's what I'm loving we're doing on this podcast. Like we're unpacking some of these, if you want to call them myths or biases or misunderstandings about what moms need to thrive and why fertility does not have to be at her detriment. That's what I love that we're unpacking very practically in this series. And so community, Leah Jacobson, what role, start us off, what role does community have to play in a future where women do not fear pregnancy?
I think we all instinctively know this as moms that we don't want to be alone. Like, you don't want to be alone in those first days postpartum. You want someone there beside you. You want someone like mentoring and helping and just telling you, like, it's going to be okay. We don't want to be alone in our deliveries. We don't want to be alone in our pregnancies. Like, we know instinctively that we're going to do better if we have people around us. However, I think there's something about fierce independence that has been almost bred into us, almost like prescribed for us as women of show that you're independent. Don't depend upon anyone. You don't need people around you. You're girl power. Do this on your own. And then there's also the mean girl culture of like protect yourself from the mean girls because they're going to make fun of you. They're going to expose you. Like we're vulnerable to one another as well. So it's this weird, like, you know, we can't quite figure out, do we want other women around us or do we not want other women around us? But I think deep down, I think we all desire it because we're made for relationships.
But I think what's really important to note is that this loneliness that I think is very prevalent, I see it in my coaching practice all the time. You have seen it as a lactation consultant coming into women's homes and meeting them at this very vulnerable time in their lives. This is a modern concept. Like we did not do life this way for generations, like for hundreds of years. We lived in community. Okay, have I told you how nerdy I am about period films? Have I told you? Like, I don't think you know this about me.
No, wait, like period films? Like what type of period films are we talking here? Like what are we talking about?
Periods, like what we talk about at Guiding Star all the time. I'm talking like historical. Okay, so
eras, historical films.
I love historical anything. So like Downton Abbey, I watched.
Oh, me too. Me too. I love them.
You know, obviously I know that there's some dramatization and art being interpreted here, but I love just like right now I'm watching Jamestown. Okay, so Jamestown is 1650s, I want to say, when the Jamestown colony by the Virginia Company, right? They were only bringing women in. Like 12 years, men lived there and set up the town, and then they purchased wives to cross the pond. And it was the very first time women were coming into the colony. So I just find it interesting. I love watching the production design element. You know, I'm a former production designer. So fun to watch how they outfit the towns. But my favorite thing here is how people lived. And again, obviously, this is like an artistic, you know, representation. But I've got to believe that it's coming from some history. We all lived historically for generations where there was a central town, like there
Yeah.
was a central access to water, access to the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, what have you. And so much of life was done communally. The other story that I love to tell on this topic of communal living is when I went to the Tenement Museum in New York City for the very first time. And if you're not familiar, the Tenement Museum, it was this fascinating project where a building was condemned, I think, something like that. It was going to be torn down. And what they discovered was like an archaeological find. They discovered all of these apartments that had kind of been left preserved, and they ended up turning it into a museum open to the public. And they tell these incredible stories of the people that they know live there. And you're able to see like every detail. I remember one, when sometimes you measure kids' heights on the casing
The
of your
doors. Yeah, you write it on the door. Yeah.
they had that. They had like, anyways, just like all of these artifacts of all these different families. But the thing that struck me that these guys would tell at the various tours is how communally people lived. They were explaining it was very normal in these apartments. And so the one that I toured was late 1800s period. It was very normal in these apartments to just leave your doors open. Kids would run in and out of everyone's apartment. All the women would do the washing together in this centralized area. The men would be in the bar that was in the basement of the apartment. And there's a funny story they told about kids. Like kids would get a bucket and they would go downstairs and fill up with beer and then bring back up to the apartment. Anyway, but the whole point I'm trying to make here is for generations we lived historically, or we lived communally. We lived in a village with a lot of access to each other. And it's only a very modern change in the way that we lived when, people started to move out to the suburbs to where they could afford housing, have you. I know you write a lot about this in your book as well, Leah.
Well, I mean, I talk a little bit about it, about the just how dangerous loneliness actually is. We know, I don't talk about this particular part in my book, but we know, there was research, that groundbreaking research that began in the 1940s and 1950s of institutionalized orphans, and how it was actually like lethal for them not to be touched, not to be hugged, not to be spoken to, babies that were left in cribs. And when we began to realize, I think medically, that this is dangerous, they had shortened lifespans, they had developmental delays, lots of problems from just not being held and talked to and cared for, which, in a communal sort of setting where you've got kids running from door to door in the tenement, you've got the 6-year-old lugging around the 1-year-old, you've got all these kids picking you up and carrying you around, and like you're just you're being manhandled constantly as a child in these sort of situations. You're never left alone anywhere, and it helps us to grow and develop naturally and healthy. So I think the research, when we began to realize that it had medical implications on our longevity, on our development, that's where I think this has taken an interesting turn, because we now know scientifically, empirically, that we need community. We are made for it. We still see kind of the punishment aspect of when you are shunned from your community, when you are put out from your community. This was considered a punishment, like isolation, and we still consider it a punishment. Even in the judicial system, in the prison system, you get put into solitary confinement. You are put alone. So it's weird, because at the same time, we're recognizing this is a punishment. This is bad for us, like to be put off on our own alone. And yet we also uphold this ideal of you need to be fiercely independent. You need to be able to do it all by yourself. Like this is also like a virtue at the same time that it's a punishment. So it's just a very weird moment where we say, independence is so good. Like you should be able to do this on your own. But yet it's so bad for us, and it's causing so much loneliness. And in women, it's causing a lot of mental health issues. Like this is causing distress. We're having anxiety, depression linked to loneliness.
I like to approach this topic from a very practical sort of lens, right? How does one learn to mother? How does one learn to homemake? So you and I are both in our 40s, right? I did not grow up with home ec. Did you grow up with a home ec class?
We did. We learned to sew and cook in the home ec classroom. But I'm in a
I mean,
very rural area of the country, so I think maybe that's
mm,
maybe unique.
but for our generation, I think we were probably like I remember the older girls ahead of me, they still had, I remember one of my schools had a kitchen in it, and you did sort of home ec things, but definitely like I did not have that same class. So I think we were probably like that last phase typically, right? That had it as part of actual
Well, I
education.
am a little older than you, so maybe I'm the older girl.
There
You're
you
the
go.
middle schooler, I'm the senior.
Exactly. By the time I got to, high school, for sure, it was not present. So how does one learn even domestic skills? I think of breastfeeding. How does one, I'm nursing my infant right now. How does one
Yeah.
learn to breastfeed comfortably?
Yeah.
How does one learn? I remember I had to be coached in a couple of my kids. One had like almost a tongue tie. It ended up not being a tongue tie, but like couldn't nurse on one side for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
somebody showed me how to change my position, that there was various ways you could hold the baby. Anyway, my point is, how does one learn these things, even just basic domestic skills, without somebody to show them? And again, the absence of home ec, the absence of living a little bit more connected. When you think about it, especially in more urban metropolitan areas, you literally get in an elevator and you go to a concrete box in the sky. Like, I can't think of anything more isolating, just even that visual. Like, you're all living in these little concrete boxes that are all segregated from each other. Not today, it is not as common to leave your doors open and let your kids run in and out of everybody's apartment. There would be actual problems with that. You get children's aid called, probably, you know what I mean? It's just a very different time. But we have to answer that question. How do you learn even basic domestic skills when you are not in community with others? What do we do about that, Leah?
Yeah, well, and it's not even just the domestic skills, like we tend to think of homemaking as domestic skills, but it's really just relationship, communal, societal communication skills that we're lacking, that we're not necessarily getting the full experience of, because we're depending so much upon kind of this system of school to teach us real life things, and it really what's in the curriculum, so there's so much there that we could like dive into on just the education of our children, the systems, everything, how to overhaul it. But I mean, what you're getting at, as a lactation consultant, you mentioned breastfeeding. That I think is such a perfect example for this, because the little girls, that grow up watching their mom breastfeed their siblings, that see that this happens in everyday life, they understand that this is something that is just fit into your life, that you make room for, that your baby comes with you wherever you go, that it's just a natural part of life. They grow up to be the women that naturally just pick that baby up and just kind of move right into breastfeeding. And sure, sometimes there are problems. Sometimes we have tongue ties. Sometimes we have insufficient milk supply. There are some problems, but the problem of just not knowing how is typically not present in the same way. There's a confidence, there's an idea of the lifestyle of breastfeeding because they've witnessed it. That's something, as a lactation consultant, that is very hard for me to teach, to try to put it into schedules, to try to put it into, okay, every 2.5 hours, make sure that you're feeding your baby, versus, when your breasts start to hurt and you start to feel a little whatever and your baby starts to cry, feed them. Like there's different ways of teaching it. And I find that we tend to try to teach this very rigidly, almost like this, when it is just a part of life that has to be something that you're kind of surrendered to and accustomed to. And and the best way to learn that is watching other women do it, seeing them, wherever they're at on a Zoom call, pull out the breast, nurse the baby, that comfort with it, instead of feeling like this is a big production. I have to go off someplace else. I have to make this the thing I'm doing right now. That it becomes very difficult for women to bring breastfeeding into their daily life. And I think that that's a sort of communal thing. Breastfeeding is a perfect example of something that should be taught communally, that should be taught in the presence of others, because it first of all, corrections that can happen, when you see a brand new mom that's breastfeeding her baby and it's all awkward and weird, to be able to see her and to say, hey, do you want me to get you a pillow? Hey, how you doing here? You need something? Like, to be able to help one another make those corrections early on is also just so important. And that happens best around one another. That's why groups like La Leche League have been so successful, because it creates a space and a place where women can see and witness one another breastfeeding. They can see this and normalize it, and understand how it just fits into their life. And this is just a normal part of life now as a mom.
Yeah, at our guiding star centers, we have the ability for moms to get together when they're breastfeeding, and you can weigh the baby after she has been fed, so that you can see, oh my gosh, like milk is in her tummy, like, so there's a lot of support that can be given. Motherhood, I don't know about you. We have a little bit different upbringing. Like, you grew up in a very rural community. Community was sort of natural. Like, I find in more agricultural communities, a kind of neat community, because you need a lot of people working on the farm and what have you. There's just, I think that, again, that's where we came from. We came from an agricultural way of life that I love today. I grew up in a city, in the concrete box. Like, I was on the subway as young as I can remember. And it was very different. I grew up also in a little bit of a, like, what you're describing, a little bit more of, you should know how to do this. And so there should be some independence. Like, this is something you learn, and now you're going to go out and do this alone. And there was definitely among my peers this sort of notion of, yeah, you don't really admit if you're struggling, or if you do, you're going to only admit it to a very, 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 very small select group. Like, you need to show that you are fine. And then, of course, let's bring in the role that now social media can play on having to sort of feel like you have it all figured out. So now, not only have we lost, like you grew up with, so a more agricultural approach to life that was by necessity communal, right? So we went to sort of much more urban settings where independence was very much emphasized, where access to education for women, of course, then brought, lean in and crash the glass ceiling and all that jazz. But the impacts of that, and, this isolation, delayed childbearing, and then add social media, where you are literally getting access to someone's edited highlight reel.
Yes.
No wonder we have so much mental illness and crisis today.
And it is the mental health aspect of this. We have to talk about this, that women, the rates of depression and anxiety, like, we may be presenting these edited, perfect reels that look like I've got it all together. It looks like I'm very happy. It looks like I know it's, I'm great. I'm great. I'm great. Like, that's what we see a lot of. Every now and then you see the very honest mom on TikTok who's just like the hot mess. And then she just gets bombarded. People are like, they don't want to see that. They're really not there for that honest view of a woman. But I did write about this in my book a little bit. And we've known this for a long time. We've been talking about this, 20 years. We've been talking about the effects of kind of isolation. And then the internet just accelerated it so much when the smartphones came out. We can just, pretend that we have a social life, pretend that we have all these friends like right in our pocket that we actually have never met in real life. And I do think online friendships are real. I think they're 100% real. I have friends that I don't know that I've ever met them in person, but I do trust them. I do know them. So those are real friendships in a way. But there is something about that incarnate, like, flesh in the, like, person that you can hold and hug and care for and, pick up physically and do her dishes, like that physical friendship that's so important. I wrote about it in my book. I'm pulling like an exact passage from my book right now. So page 33, in 2017, there's an article that Ada Calhoun published called The New Midlife Crisis. And I loved this article so much. And in it, she reports that women who are approaching midlife, so us, Lisa, hello, they're experiencing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and identity confusion at an astonishing rate. Nearly 60% of Gen Xers describe themselves as stressed out, quote, stressed out. And a 2009 analysis of the General Social Survey data shows that women's happiness has declined both absolutely and relative to men from the early 70s to the mid 2000s. So we've been tracking this since the 70s. We have seen that women's happiness is, slowly going down, and men's happiness is slowly going up. I find that very fascinating, by the way, that as women's happiness goes down, the men's goes up. Like, really? Okay, what's that all about? And then the mental health effects. We've suffered tremendously in the past 2 decades. In 2018, the New York Times found that white women over age 45 account for 1/5 of the adult population. So they're 20% of the adult population. But white women over age 45 account for 41% of antidepressant users, up from about 30% in 2000. So we went up about 11 percentage points there in about 15 years. And then older white women, it doesn't define older, but I'm going to say, 65 plus maybe, account for 58% of those on antidepressants long term. So almost 60% of antidepressant users long term are older white women, which I find that very fascinating just with the information and my background in like the women's movement and higher education. It's it was white women in the 70s and the 80s that most enthusiastically embraced the idea of this autonomy, this independence, this I can do this on my own. I'm going to go get a big career. I'm going to make all the money. I don't need to depend on anybody else. I can do this. And we're seeing now that the long-term effect of that is not good. It's not good.
I just read an article on First Things about this new midlife crisis, and this should not be a surprise to anybody listening, but it's many women who have chosen to delay childbirth or to forego it altogether, and they have climbed the corporate ladder. They have had a lot of success in their career, financially, all the things. They look around, they're like, is this all? That shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody listening to this podcast. And that's a challenging question to answer when perhaps you are past the point of being able to have children. And I think, I can't remember if we talked about this on our last podcast or if we just talked about this personally. Like, you can be replaced in your career anytime, but you cannot be replaced as the mother of a child. Like that
Well,
is.
and I think there's a meme going around right now. Have you seen this one? And it has that, it's pretty viral this last week, actually. It's the, you just died and they're clearing out, the HR is clearing out your desk at your office and they've posted for your position and they're going to replace you and blah, blah, blah. But your family, and I've actually been reading some interesting responses to it in working mothers groups. And one of them I thought was very insightful. And she just said, I understand the sentiment of this, but I don't think people understand how many of us don't have a choice any longer, how many of us have to work. She said, and things like this just sting. It stings so much because I know that I'm investing all my time and I know that I'm investing all of my energy into a place where I'm just a cog. I'm just somebody who's replaceable and I want to be home. I want to be there with the people that need me. And so, yes, I don't disagree with this. And I think it's important if you have the choice, but so many of us no longer do financially. And so that's the other place that we've come to where this was a decision for most women in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. They were in relationships. They had a man that was able to work and support the family. And they had the luxury, quite frankly, of choosing to stay home or go to work. And many chose to go to work and are now experiencing, some of the effects of those decisions. But I think it's harder because we have some of this data now and we see that they're not happy and fulfilled later in life, but we don't necessarily have the choice not to work. So it is a tough place. It is a tough place that a lot of women have come to.
And all the more reason why today's topic of the podcast is so important, because what happens when you suffer in silence alone, regardless of what it is that you struggle with, right? Whatever part of this podcast that you heard that resonates with you and perhaps is a challenge for you personally, what happens when we struggle and suffer in silence? Nothing good. I hope you're at this point, I just want to invite you, if you're listening, wherever you're listening, how are you doing? Like, if no one has asked you this in the last little while, like, how are you really doing? How are you really doing mentally? How are you really doing physically, emotionally, spiritually? Because in the absence of the traditional community, where maybe somebody would see you because kind of by force, quote unquote, like, when there's only 100 people who live in your town, like somebody's going to see you and maybe acknowledge like, hey, like, you don't look well, right? Or we have, gotten very good at putting on a social mask, so to speak. And so maybe you're just really good at putting on a social mask wherever you go. But really, how are you doing? And if there's nobody in your life to ask you that question, just pause for a moment and really answer it. But really, I hope you understand like our passion behind creating community for many of the different things that we've talked about, the mental health impact, the physical sort of just, again, like breastfeeding that we talked about, some of the physical things that come with learning from other women, observing other women. I learn all the time from women who handle stress better than I do. I'm not too bad. Like I'm a mindset coach, so there's some things that I've definitely learned, but I love when I watch other women discipline their children in public. I take notes all the time. I'm like, that was a very firm but gentle approach to that child. Mental note. So Leah, if people are listening to this and they're like, this is all well and good, I would love to have a community, but gosh, like, I don't know, I just moved somewhere new. I have no family nearby. How do we create community in the absence of the traditional one where we were quote unquote just sort of forced to see each other because things were smaller and more compact? How do you create a community today?
Well, I think one of the most beautiful things about us having these female bodies that are just, they kind of just do their thing, is the connection between women because of it. There's something about what our females' bodies do that transcends our, political divides, our religious divides, our opinions. Like there is something that connects us to one another beyond our thoughts. Like I'll never forget the experience of sitting at the park with one of my I don't remember which one it was probably baby number 3 or 4. I don't remember because I had a bunch of toddlers. I had toddlers running around the playground and I'm sitting on a bench and I'm nursing a baby and I'm just exhausted. It must have been baby number 4 in 5 years. I think that must have been about this point. It's just chaos. And I just remember there was a woman across the park sitting at a bench and she was also breastfeeding a baby. And we were very different. Like even just like physically, you could tell like sometimes you can just tell like we think differently about the world, like the way we dress, the way we accessorize, the vehicles we're driving, the dogs we have with us. Like I knew we were very different, like ideologically, but there was this lovely moment of just eye contact, smile, connection. I see you. I see you and like what you're doing is so good and like good job mama, and just that little moment. We actually didn't have a conversation because I was like chasing toddlers like into the street. It's just chaos. But I think that there's something about our physical bodies and what we're doing that can create relationships. Sometimes we might struggle to think like, who are my people? Like, oh, they don't agree with me, or oh, they're going to judge. Like we create barriers around our people. Who should I be friends with? Who are the people that are going to accept me? And our bodies just sort of see other bodies and they're like, hey, I got you. Nice job. Like, I get it. I know what you're doing here. Like, especially in the throes of motherhood, I think there is something that just connects us.
When you see another pregnant woman and you're pregnant at the same time, I always have that little moment of like solidarity.
There's like the salute. There's like the, like go, like go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up just the physical body. I never participated in these. I don't know why, but it's interesting to observe online Facebook groups. Many times people will be like, oh yeah, I remember you were in the September 2029 due date group that I was in. So like, that's a really just simple example of how your body creates a unifying relational thing with somebody else, especially when you are literally tracking with fellow moms who are due at the same time. So interesting. I got to take it though now to a very practical skill because the mindset you can't. To create a community, it also requires you dropping perhaps the preconceived notion that you must be able to do this all yourself.
Yes.
I cannot tell you, Leah, how many moms I have coached who have said to me, I've chosen to have this many children. So therefore I should be able to do this on my own. And I am like, that is a big pile of baloney. Like, stop it. Stop it out. Because historically, we never mothered alone. You did not. The kids ran around in the field with their older cousins, with their whatevers. Like, it just was not like this before. You did not live in isolation. So why would we think that because you've been open to having a bunch of kids, that we should expect you to do this all on your own, sometimes without your spouse. That's the other difference. When we lived agriculturally, you maybe saw your spouse a couple times a day because they would come in from the farm.
Yeah,
You know,
that's totally true.
like, so it's, you also mentally weren't necessarily alone all day. You were probably out there with him. I get so fired up about this because it's not historically how we were created. It's not humanly, like, just we were not meant to be on a metaphysical level created for aloneness, right? And so why would you think it's like, okay, yeah, you would succeed at this? Like, why would you think that?
Because Lisa, and this is what we've been talking about so much, is the shame and the embarrassment, and that you had all these babies, you figure it out, like, we're so ashamed of our motherhood, of our fertility, and we see our children, like, we're apologizing for our children in public spaces. I mean, I always make it a point. I fly quite a bit, and I always make it a point when I see the babies on the planes to, congratulate these parents, to say, good job, you're doing a great job, like, because they're always apologizing. I very rarely on a plane is there a baby where the parents aren't like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Like, they're so sorry to bring their baby into a public space. I'm like, no, they're a little person. Like, they belong. They're with you. They're part of you. They're part of the human family. And we love and accept them because they're part of the human family.
Bring them on. So if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I absolutely feel that way. Like, I feel like I have to do it all on my own, or I feel some shame around the choices I've made. Like, may I encourage you right here, right now, you make them. You may place those thoughts of needing to be independent with other thoughts like, this is how it's always been, meaning we have always lived in community. And so if you are struggling with creating a community, I want to encourage you first to just look at your thoughts around motherhood, around needing to be independent, maybe needing to do it all yourself, and just very gently encourage you that you can drop those. They do not need to be part of the way you continue to live and move forward here on out. And so then I think it does require a skill of being open to, this sounds funny maybe, but like just even making new friends or making new connections or allowing people to come into your life and maybe see a little bit of your mess. And so what does this look like? It could look like literally inviting people over more, just sort of that very, hey, we need to come over. Like, maybe there's a mom that you talk to all the time in the playground when you do school drop off, and you're just like, hey, do you want to come over for a coffee? And there's a little bit of a invitation into your more personal world, invitation into the way that you do life, And if that's not your cup of tea, then maybe it's you're participating in things in your community. So, for example, just any type of moms group, Guiding Star Centers have all kinds of support and community group moms. Your local community center very likely has some kind of a mom and me type thing. Your library, like in the community, that's where I think we're trying to emulate the village again. The library is a good example, right? There's sort of, again, it's a central spot. It's where, the pursuit of knowledge, like I kind of love that. But the library often has these community building, or can be community building activities. Leah, what is available in your community, or you and when you were a mom?
I mean, we've got great things. Like, we've got the story time at the library. We've got, those sort of programs that happen that are really great that I've always, this morning I dropped my kids off at Vacation Bible School, like Totus Tuus started today, and you see all the kids from the church are all there together. And it was an interesting moment, actually, as I thought about this after, or like kind of during the drop off. We've got all the moms bringing all their kids in, and we're all dropping our kids off and writing the checks and paying and registering them. And there's kind of this lingering moment where the kids all go off, to the thing, and the moms are all kind of standing in the hallway, and we're all looking at each other, and it was this, hey, what are you guys doing today? Like, we all just realized, like, we just dropped our kids off, like we should all like hang out or do something. And I kind of pondered this. One of the moms who had young children said, hey, I'm going out to the park, does anybody want to join me? And I watched, and I knew I had to come back and do this podcast, so I was like, I'm sorry, I can't, but like, I really desperately kind of wanted to be there because she's a young mom. She dropped off 2 older kids and had 3 babies with her still. And I watched as the moms all kind of responded, and everybody was like, oh no, I gotta go do laundry, I gotta go grocery shopping, and it was all this sort of like, I have to do these very alone things. And we all just sort of went our way. And it made me a little bit sad because I thought this should have been or could have been a moment where we all had a cup of coffee and just reconnected with each other. And we're all friends. We all go to church together. We see each other every week. But, we opted for our own things. And I think that that is just something we're so habituated to of, I got to get my tasks done, laundry, dishes, sweep the floor. Um, so I guess I digress a little bit, but I had this very like moment this morning where I thought exactly of this of I could have used a cup of coffee with my community. That would have been nice.
But the thing I want to pick up on that is there was a willingness for someone to take initiative. And I think that's a point that's important to make right now. If nobody in your community, so think about it, it could be your school, it could be your local church, it could even be where your kids play sports, like we were talking about earlier. Maybe you are the person who takes just a little bit of initiative. So I'll just give a really random example. Maybe you bring the box of coffee to the soccer practice and you share the box of coffee because you're all going to be hanging out for a while. And that sharing of coffee also then, not just I'm sharing coffee, it's, hey, I'm sharing coffee, and hey, oh, that's your son, number 13. Oh, cool. How long has he been playing soccer? Do you live in the area? Like there's an impetus, there's a reason now to do a little life together. And that is so imperative.
And always food, always drinks, always food. Like it's so just like, it's so feminine, quite frankly. It's so mothering to feed, to feed the friends.
Examine your thoughts around being in community. Perhaps you are the person who might need to take initiative to do a little bit of life together. The final thing I want to talk about community wise that I just think is so imperative that can't happen online, right? You were talking about like, I can do your dishes for you, what happened? It's giving that physical support. So I love it when a friend allows me to clean their house. Like I just have a quick story, and I'll not give the details so this person, their privacy is remained. But I was at a girlfriend's house, and we would see each other very regularly. And we were friends, but not like the kind of friendship where like it wasn't all that intimate yet. Like we were still getting to know each other. Like I was still getting to remember all our kids' names or whatever. But her house was trashed. Like it was like top to bottom, trash. And I can't remember if she was pregnant or if she was like right postpartum. I can't really remember, to be honest, but she had a lot of children, as did I. And I came in, and again, I felt a little vulnerable because I was like, if I was really, really good friends with her, it would not be an issue. I wouldn't feel vulnerable. I would just ask her and then let her answer. But because we were only just getting to know each other, I felt a little bit awkward, but I just was like, I'm going to ask it. And I just, do you mind if I helped you pick up a little? And I remember being like, she's going to judge me. She's going to feel judged. Like, is she going to think that I'm coming in here and I'm holier than thou and like your house
judging her?
Yeah. And I was like, I waited. Like I'm even feeling it in the pit of my stomach because I so desperately did not want her to feel offended, like at all. But I knew that it would be very helpful to her if I picked up. And I see the most hesitation in her. Like I think she perhaps wanted to say no because of, you're a guest in my home. Like that's weird. You should
polite. It's not polite for you to be cleaning my stuff. Yeah.
And I saw it on her face for like a moment. And this is why I'm trying to remember if she was pregnant or not, because I just can't remember. But like I can picture her face and where she was sitting. And then the moment passed, and she was like, "That would be amazing." And I just got to it. Like I just got to it. Like I just put everything in baskets. I put anything I could in the dishwasher. I took like very simple, like not like, getting all in the cupboards or anything, but just what would allow for peace visually to occur. And it happened. And then we sat and had a cup of coffee, and the kids continued to play, and it was amazing. And that can only happen when you in real life. Okay. Another thing that I have a vision for all Guiding Star Project centers, okay, all Guiding Star centers, and that they have a napping room. Like I want every single center across the United States to have the ability for a mom to drop off her child in our child watch, where while she's on site, a loving and caring person will care for her child. Could even be a little infant, and she can just sit in a room like with whatever she wants. If she wants a good book, if she wants a cup of tea, if she wants to take a nap, like that physical ability cannot be ignored in this conversation. There is something that the physical, like corporeal ability for me to just hold your baby while you take a breather, that is so important. Don't you think, Leah?
Oh, completely. And we're happy that we already have some of our centers that do have that already. I mean, the napping room at Guiding Star Southwest doubles as the lactation space, but it's beautiful. There's a couch, you go in there, you lay down, it's quiet, it's dark, it's like, oh, you can just fall asleep. Guiding Star Orange City, in their old building actually had an entire guest bedroom suite set up with a noisemaker and like the darkening curtains. And the napping room there was legit before they switched locations, but they have been able to recreate it a little bit. And so these spaces, yeah, this is where mental health improves, is when tired moms get a nap. This is where loneliness goes away, when somebody holds your baby and you're not ashamed and you're not embarrassed. And it's just the norm and it's expected. It's expected that you're going to need help. And so we're here. We're here to say we're going to help you before you even ask for it, because we know you need help. We've had babies. We know you need help. So come and accept it.
I go historically, like there was somebody when you lived more communally, these tenement apartments, there was somebody to hold your baby. It could have been an older daughter of one of your friends, or it was your friend, or it was, like you said, the 6-year-old dragging the 1-year-old. Like there was just so much more access to each other. And so the mom, from what I imagine, not that I've read that much written on this topic of how did moms rest, I haven't read that much on this, but from what I can imagine and extrapolate from the community and from my learning my children, like I always have someone to hold a baby when my children are not in school. So meaning after school on the weekend, it is very rare that this sweet little girl who I'm holding right now on my lap while we podcast, it is very, very rare that she goes, like, oh, if you went, like she'll just go wah, wah, and then there's somebody who's running to her aid. Like, but we live that way so much more. And so in the absence of that, come to a Guiding Star Center where it has a lovely little napping pod. All of our patients are required to have child watch. They all have different schedules, so call ahead or whatever. But get yourself some relief. Like it is possible to get relief and necessary. And Leah, when people tell me that I coach a lot of women, and they'll be like, "Oh, I don't have family nearby, and so I can't get a break." I'm like, "Oh well, like a family. It doesn't. Where does it say in the encyclopedia of how children? It can only be your family that helps you with your children. Now, if that's what you want to do, that's a choice, and acknowledge that's the choice you're making. But there are many capable, licensed, experienced people who can hold your baby and give you some relief, right?
Well,
So
and it's funny. I think the thing, to just to address that for a second, when we say I don't have family nearby, I think we're almost we moved within an hour of family. Like we moved closer to family for the long haul. Like when we would be traveling on a trip or a vacation, or like we had something where we needed grandma or an aunt to watch the kids for 4 or 5 days. We wanted that relationship with grandparents and stuff to be good enough that they would know them and they'd be comfortable in their space, because we get there frequently enough. It's not such a big deal when we go to grandma's house. It's not like a 5-day trek across the country. It's an hour there and an hour back now, which, it's enough space for those of us that need just a little space. But it's close enough as well that you get that good relationship. And I think that there is almost a foul, I'm not really sure how to explain it. Like, I don't know what people imagine when they say they don't have family close by. If they're imagining that grandma lives next door and she's takes the place of daycare or takes the place or whatever. But I think we need to be open, like you were saying, that it's not family, for more of these shorter kind of day to day, like we also have gotten into the habit of having, like swapping, almost like child watch swapping. Like, you'll take the kids on Monday and I'm going to go get all my groceries, and then I'll take the kids on Tuesday. And like your friends' kids come to your house, and you get these short relief periods of time. So getting short periods of relief is also really important. Like some of us hold on and hold on and hold on because we're going to take that vacation in November for a week, and the kids are going to grandma's for a week. So I'm just going to like white knuckle it to November, and I'm going to make it, and I'm not going to get any help for the next 6 months because I've got a vacation plan for November. That's not good. That's not healthy. Like we got to have these like daily sort of breaks and work with our friends to do that.
100%. I could talk about this honestly for hours. Like I just, this was a very hard lesson for me to learn. I had this total notion that you have to have it all be all, and that included being an incredible mother, an incredible career mother, career woman, but like you did it all, and you did it all on your own. Like you just, I didn't just, it's just, to be frank, like we do run out of energy. Like obviously there's supernatural graces that sometimes kick in, but like there's just also the reality of our central nervous systems will only be able to handle so much. And sometimes we need.
At what point, Lisa, I just have to ask, at what point did you finally like realize and like release that? Like, was there a certain child where you were like, okay, something's got to change?
I mean, I talk about this in my book, The Possibility Mom, and just very briefly, if you have not read Leah's book, Holistic Feminism, it is a must read in understanding where we have been as a society. Like there's a really good history lesson inside of holistic feminism that will very much help to give you some context as to how we got here. And in my book, The Possibility Mom, I talk about, it was when I had my fourth child, and I was still very much in this whirlwind of very focused on my HGTV career, very focused on just success in general and what it said about me. And yeah, so that fourth child was when I really had, I tell the story in my book. I call it my minivan meltdown. I just had this massive implosion. Nothing was, well, on the outside, it looked like I had a lot of things together, but my interior life, my marriage, my relationship with my kids, none of it was going well. So yeah, it was about, that's when it all kind of, changed for me. It was 4. Was it similar for you?
Well, number 4 is when we moved closer to family. It was baby number 4 in 5 years. I was like, something's got to give. Like, we need something. And we made the decision to move closer to family. Just, to have, and even though we didn't use, grandma and grandpa as like, daycare on a frequent basis, it was knowing they were there that helped a lot. Like, knowing, like, okay, it's an hour. If I'm going to have a breakdown, we're getting in the car, we're going through McDonald's drive-through, and an hour from here, they're going to run in the woods. And I'm going to breathe. And that is something.
Yeah, the point we're trying to make here is that you've got to create community somehow. There's got to be somebody in your life that can catch you when you fall, that you are just able to fall apart with, that you are able to say, I need a breathe, please take my children. Or even just something simple like, I could use dinner made for me. Can either can we just come over, or can you bring it? Like, and that can be your mother, it can be a grandmother, but it can also be, a dear friend. But I want to challenge, it can also be the neighbor across the street that you barely know.
Oh, isn't that funny? Isn't that funny how we don't meet our physical neighbors nowadays? And they are often the sweetest people. They just don't, and I think we all assume that we're a burden to one another. They don't want to bother us, and we don't want to bother them. But the reality is we're all just like, I wish I could say hi to you. I'll share one other practical. Okay, so you talked about how you cleaned your friend's place. I had a friend when we first moved to this community, and this was kind of my getting to know other people too. There was a woman a couple blocks away from me expecting twins, and I think they were babies 5 and 6 or 6 and 7, I don't know, but she was very pregnant, massively pregnant with twins. And it was summer, and I think my love language is gardening. I think it's plants. Like, I love plants. I love plants so much. And I remember walking by her house, And her flower beds the summer before had been beautiful. She had done such a nice job. And this summer they were a hot mess. Like there was no weeding, there was nothing planted. And so I just asked her, can I clean up your flower beds? And she was like so embarrassed, so embarrassed. And she was like, oh yeah, I mean, but thank God she physically could not bend over. She physically could not do it. So I just said, let me just clean up his front flower bed. And I love gardening so much. So it was a gift for me to get to do it for her. I went off to, the greenhouse, bought a couple packets of annuals, put beautiful flowers in front of her house. And then I got to enjoy them all summer too, because I walked by her house all summer. But she talked about how that was just such like a meaningful gift to her. Like I didn't go in her house, I didn't go in her space, but like I was, I did her flower beds for her. And our friendship, we're still very good friends. Like it began a really kind of vulnerable, good friendship between us. So there's lots of ways you can help.
And what we're really talking about here is an increase in humility, right? To be vulnerable requires some humility, because you have to be able to just be like, yeah, okay, take my mess. Here's my mess. See mess. I think we could do a whole thing on childcare, but I think that's another reason why a lot of women are unwilling to have other people besides family take care of their kids, because they have to like let them into their house, and their house might be mess, not just the physical kind. Like there's all kinds of messes that can be happening behind our closed doors. And so it's
vulnerable.
just
so vulnerable. And it's our sense of self. It's our sense of worth. It's our identity. It's, am I a good mom? Am I a good person? Am I a mess? Like we're so vulnerable to one another. But here's the reality. We're all trying our best. And, we're not perfect. No one is perfect. So let's just be honest with each other.
Let's end this podcast with, I'm going to put you on the spot to see if you can find a story. I can go first if you can't think of it quickly, but what is the most meaningful act of service another mom has done for you?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Oh my gosh.
I'm curious. You can do it in the last like month, or you could do it ever, whatever you want.
I mean, there's thousands of them. People pick up my mess all the time. You go first.
We talk about this very publicly. My husband has clinical anxiety. And so sometimes anxiety is, very challenging. And I'm in a newer community. So we've been here a year. And I have started to make those more intimate, more vulnerable friendships that really you can't do it quickly. Like these conversations and revealing yourself and sharing things that are hard happen over time, which is only natural. And just one friend, I was having a particularly hard day. My husband was having a particularly hard day with anxiety. And I just was like, I need a safe space to like, just be like, apart. And she was like, go. And then I just was like, nothing is working. Everything's falling apart. No. And then she gave me that ear to listen. And then she was like, what can I practically do to support you today? And I said, if you could bring me dinner, that would mean so much. And that's what I did. So that was actually very recent. That was like,
I've had people do all sorts of things, like from my mom coming and folding laundry for 7 hours, because we're so far behind. So those are little things, but the ones that I treasure, I think the most are food, are the meals. Like after you deliver a baby, the meal trains. I've had friends. That's the thing in our community pretty commonly, is that when you have a baby, someone sets up a meal train for you for the next month. And oh, what a gift. Like that's really meaningful to me, because I really don't like cooking. So
good. Well, very good, Leah Jacobson. Everybody listening, if you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a share, give it a like, give it a subscribe, wherever you are watching or listening to this. If you can think of a mom in your life who maybe she needs community and this podcast would help her, please send it over. And of course, continue our conversation in our Guiding Star Academy, which is our community of like-minded women who love this concept of holistic feminism, holistic healthcare, and what it looks like to create these kinds of communities to build a future where women of your pregnancy. Leah Jackson, Love you, girl. These are honestly so life-giving for me. I look forward to these conversations every Monday. Like, I mean it. Like, it's like, I mean, we are friends, but it's like, it's girlfriend time. Like, this is just like
It is.
really, and I hope y'all are loving it as well. All right, Leah. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Have a beautiful day. Bye.